Welcome back to Storytime with Belle, everyone. When we last left our heroes, Inigo Montoya was getting lost in the bottom of a bottle. Lost without Vizzini, he has nothing left in his purpose except to get drunk. We know Fezzik is wandering the mountainside alone and scared. We know that Wesley is currently in the 5th level cage of the dungeon zoo. We know that Buttercup is having these horrible nightmares about love, about her first children, and about what her life will be like when she becomes queen. But we also know that she will never become queen. We know that Prince Humperdinck intends to kill his much-beloved bride the night of the wedding. If you're ready, let us continue Chapter 6, Part 2 of The Princess Bride. That night, they began to torture Wesley. Count Rugen did the actual pain-inducing, and the prince simply sat by, asking questions out loud, inwardly admiring the Count's skill. The Count really cared about pain. The reasons behind the screams interested him fully, as much as the anguish itself. And whereas the prince spent his life in physically following the hunt, Count Rugen read and studied anything he could get his hands on dealing with the subject of distress. "All right now," the prince said to Wesley, who lay in the great 5th level cage. "Before we begin, I want to ask you this. Have you any complaints about your treatment thus far?" "None whatever," Wesley replied. And in truth, he had none. Or he might have preferred to be unchained a bit now and then. But if you were to be a captive, you couldn't ask for more than he had been given. The albino's medical ministrations had been precise, and his shoulder was fine again. The food the albino brought had always been hot and nourishing, the wine and brandy wonderfully warming against the dankness of the underground cage. "You feel fit, then?" the prince went on. "I assume my legs are a little stiff from being chained, but other than that, yes." "Good. Then I promise you this as God himself is my witness. Answer the next question and I will set you free this night. But you must answer it honestly, fully, withholding nothing. If you lie, I will know, and then I'll let the count on you." "I have nothing to hide," Wesley said. "Ask away. Who hired you to kidnap the princess?" "It was someone from Gilder. We found fabric indicating as much on the princess's horse. Tell me the man's name, and you are free. Speak." "No one hired me," Wesley said. "I work strictly freelance. And I didn't kidnap her. I saved her from others who were doing the very thing." "You seem a reasonable fellow, and my princess claims to have known you many years. So I will give you, on her account, one last final chance. The name of the man in Gilder who hired you. Tell me, or face torture." "No one hired me, I swear." The Count set fire to Wesley's hands. Nothing permanent or disabling. He just dripped Wesley's hand in oil and brought a candle close enough to set things bubbling. When Wesley had screamed, No one, on my life!" a sufficient number of times, the Count dipped Wesley's hand in water, and he and the prince left via the underground entrance, leaving the medication to the albino, who was always nearby during the torturing times, but never visible enough to be distracting. "I feel quite invigorated," the Count said, as he and the prince began to ascend the underground staircase. "It was a perfect question. It's a perfect question. He was telling the truth. Clearly, we both know that." The prince nodded. The Count was privy to all his innermost plans for the revenge war. "I'm fascinated to see what happens," the Count went on. "Which pain will be least endurable? The physical, or the mental anguish of having freedom offered if the truth is told, then telling it and being thought a liar?" "I think the physical," said the prince. "I think you're wrong," said the Count. Actually, they were both wrong. Wesley suffered not at all throughout. His screaming was totally a performance to please them. He had been practicing his defenses for a month now, and he was more than ready. The minute the Count brought the candle close, Wesley raised his eyes to the ceiling, dropped his eyelids over them, and went in a deep and steady concentration. He took his brain away. Buttercup was what he thought of. Her autumn hair, her perfect skin, and he brought her very close beside him and had her whisper in his ear throughout the burning. I love you. I love you. I only left you in the fire swamp to test your love for me. Is it as great as mine for you? Can two such loves exist on one planet at one time? Is there such room, beloved Wesley? The albino bandaged his fingers. Wesley lay still. For the first time, the albino started things. Whispered, "You better tell them." From Wesley, a shrug. Whispered, "They'll never stop. Not once they start. Tell them what they want to know and have done with it." Shrug. Whisper, "The machine is nearly ready. They are testing it on animals now. Shrug. Whispered, "It's for your own good. I tell you these things." My own good? What good? They're going to kill me anyway. From the albino. Nod. The prince found Buttercup waiting unhappily outside his chamber doors. "It's my letter," she began. "I cannot make it right." Come in, the prince said gently. "Maybe we can help you." She sat down in the same chair as before. "All right. I'll close my eyes and listen. Read to me." "Wesley, my passion, my sweet, my only, my own. Come back. Come back. I shall kill myself otherwise. Yours in torment. Buttercup." She looked at Humperdinck. "Well, do you think I'm throwing myself at him?" "It does seem a bit forward," the prince admitted. "It doesn't leave him a great deal of room to maneuver." "Will you help me to improve it, please?" "I'll do what I can, sweet lady. But first, it might help if I knew just a bit about him. Is he really so wonderful, this Wesley of yours?" Not so much wonderful as perfect," she replied. "Kind of flawless. More or less magnificent. Without blemish. Rather on the ideal side." She looked at the prince. "Am I being helpful?" "I think emotions are clouding your objectivity just a bit. Do you actually think that there is nothing the fellow can't do?" Buttercup thought for a while. "It's not so much that there's nothing he can't do. It's more that he can do it all better than anybody else can do it." The prince chuckled and smiled. "In other words, for example, you mean if he wanted to hunt, he could go out hunt again, for example, someone such as myself?" "Oh, I would think if he wanted to, he could, quite easily. But he happens not to like hunting. At least not to my knowledge. Though maybe he does. I don't know. I never knew he was so interested in mountain climbing, but he scaled the cliffs of insanity under most adverse conditions. And everyone agrees that is not the easiest thing in the world to accomplish." "Well, why don't we begin our letter with Divine Wesley, and appeal to a sense of modesty?" the prince suggested. Buttercup began to write. Stopped. "Does divine begin D-E or D-I?" "D-I, I believe. Amazing creature," the prince replied, smiling gently as Buttercup commenced the letter. "They composed it in 4 hours, and many times," she said. "I could never get through this without you." And the prince was always most modest, asking little helpful personal questions about Wesley as often as possible without drawing attention to it. And in this way, well before dawn, she told him, smiling as she remembered, of Wesley's early fears of spinning ticks. And that night, in the fifth level cage, the prince asked, as he always asked, "Tell me the name of the man in Gilder who hired you to kidnap the princess, and I promise you immediate freedom." And Wesley replied, as he was always to reply, "No one. No one. I was alone." And the count, who had spent the day getting the spinners ready, placed them carefully on Wesley's skin. And Wesley closed his eyes and begged and pleaded, and after an hour or so, the prince and the count left, the albino remaining behind with the chore of burning the spinners and then pulling them free from Wesley, lest they accidentally poison him. And on the way up the underground stairs to the ground level, the prince said, just for conversation's sake, "Much better, don't you think?" The count, oddly, said nothing. Which was vaguely irritating to Humperdinck, because to tell the absolute truth, torture was never all that high on his scale of passions, and he would just as soon have disposed of Wesley right then. If only Buttercup would admit that he, Humperdinck, was the better man. But she would not. She simply would not. All she ever talked about was Wesley. All she ever asked about was news of Wesley. Days went by, weeks went by, party after party went by, and Florin was moved by the spectacle of their great hunting prince at last so clearly and wonderfully in love. But when they were alone, all she ever said was, "I wonder where could Wesley be? What could be taking him so long? How can I live until he comes?" Maddening. So each night, the count's discomforts, which made Wesley writhe and twist, were really sort of all right. The prince would manage an hour or so of spectating before he and the count would leave, and the count would still oddly silent. And down below, tending to the wounds, the albino would whisper, "Tell them, please. They will only add to your suffering." Wesley could barely suppress his smile. He had felt no pain, not once, none. He had closed his eyes and taken his brain away. That was the secret. If you can take your brain away from the present and send it to where it would contemplate skin like creamy white, well, let them enjoy themselves. His revenge would come. Wesley was living now, most of all for Buttercup. But there was no denying there was one more thing he wanted too. His time. Prince Humperdinck simply had no time. There seemed to be not one decision in all of Florin that one way or another didn't eventually come heavily to rest upon his shoulders. Not only was he getting married, his country was having its 500th anniversary. Not only was he noodling around in his mind the best ways to get a war going, he also had to continuously have affectionate shining from his eyes. Every detail had to be met, and met correctly. His father was just no help at all, refusing either to expire or mumbling. You thought his father was dead, but that was a fake out. Don't forget, Morgenstern was just edging into the nightmare sequence, so don't be confused. And start making sense. Queen Bella simply hovered around him, translating here and there, and it was with a shock that Prince Humperdinck realized, just 12 days before his wedding, that he had neglected to set in motion the crucial Gilder section of his plan. So he called Yellen to the castle one night. Yellen was chief of all enforcement in Florin City, a job he inherited from his father. The albino keeper of the zoo was Yellen's first cousin, and together they formed the only pair of non-nobles the prince could come close to trusting. "Your Highness," Yellen said. He was small but crafty, with darting eyes and slippery hands. Prince Humperdinck came out from behind his desk. He moved close to Yellen and looked carefully around before saying softly, "I have heard from unimpeachable sources that many men of Gilder have, of late, begun to infiltrate our thieves' quarters. They are disguised as Florinese, and I am worried." "I have heard nothing of such a thing," Yellen said. "A prince has spies everywhere." "I understand," said Yellen. "And you think, since the evidence points that they tried to kidnap your fiancée once, that such a thing might happen again?" "It's quite a possibility." "I'll close off the thieves' quarters, then," Yellen said. "No one will enter, and no one will leave." "Not good enough," the prince said. "I want the thieves' quarter emptied, and every villain jailed until I am safely on my honeymoon." Yellen did not nod quickly enough, so the prince said, "State your problem." "My men are not always too happy at the thought of entering the thieves' quarters. Many of the thieves resist change. Root them out. Form a brute squad. Get it done." "It takes at least a week to get a decent brute squad going," Yellen said. But that is enough time. But that is time enough." He bowed and started to leave. And that was when the scream began. Yellen had heard many things in his life, but nothing quite so eerie as this. He was a brave man, but this sound frightened him. It was not human, but he could not guess the throat of the beast it came from. It was actually a wild dog on the first level of the zoo, but no wild dog had ever shrieked like that before. But then, no wild dog had ever been put in the machine. The sound grew in anguish, and it filled the night sky as it spread across the castle grounds, over the walls, even into the great square beyond. It would not stop. It simply hung now below the sky, an audible reminder of the existence of agony. In the great square, half a dozen children screamed back at the night, trying to blot out the sound. Some wept. Some only ran for home. Then it began to lessen in volume. Now it was hard to hear in the great square. Now it was gone. Now it was hard to hear in the castle walls. Now it was gone from the castle walls. It shrunk across the grounds towards the first level of the Zoo of Death, where Count Rugen was fiddling with some knobs. The wild dog died. Count Rugen rose, and it was all he could do to bury his own shriek of triumph. He left the zoo and ran toward Prince Humperdinck's chambers. Yellen was just going when the Count got there. The prince was now seated behind his desk. When Yellen was gone and they were alone, the Count bowed to his majesty. "The machine," he said at last, "works." Prince Humperdinck took a while before answering. It was a ticklish situation. Granted, he was the boss, and the Count merely an underling. Still, no one in all Florin had Rugen's skills. And as an inventor, he had, obviously, at last, rid the machine of all defects. As an architect, he had been crucial in the safety factors involved in the Zoo of Death. And it had undeniably been Rugen who arranged for the only survivable entrance being the underground 5th level one. He was also supportive to the prince in all endeavors of hunting and battle, and you didn't give a follower like that a quick "Get away, boy, you bother me." So the prince indeed took a while. "Look, Ty," he said finally, "I am thrilled you smoothed out all the bugs of the machine. I never for a minute doubted you could get it right eventually. And I'm really anxious as can be to see it working. But how can I put this? I can't keep my head above water 1 minute in the next to the next. It's not just the parties and the goo-gooing with what's her name. I've got to decide how long the 500th anniversary parade is going to be, and where it starts, and where does it start, and when does it start, and which nobleman gets to march in front of which other nobleman, so that everyone's still speaking to me at the end of it. Plus, I've got a wife to murder and a country to frame for it. Plus, I've got to get the war going once it's all happened, and all this stuff I've got to do myself. Here's what it all comes down to. I'm just swamped, Ty. So now, how about if you go to work on Wesley and tell me how it goes? And when I get the time, I'll come watch. And I'm sure it'll be wonderful. But for now, what I'd like is a little breathing room. No hard feelings? Count Rugen smiled. None. And there weren't any. He always felt better when he could dole out pain alone. You could concentrate much more deeply when you were alone with agony. I knew you'd understand, Ty. There was a knock on the door, and Buttercup stuck her head in. Any news? She said. The prince smiled at her and sadly shook his head. Honey, I promise to tell you the second I hear a thing. It's only 12 days, though. Plenty of time. Dulcet, darling. Don't worry yourself. I'll leave you, Buttercup said. I was going to, the Count said. May I walk you to your quarters? Buttercup nodded, and down the corridors they walked till they reached her suite. Good night, Buttercup said quickly. Ever since the day he had first come to her father's farm, she had always been afraid of whenever the Count came near. I'm sure he'll come, the Count said. He was privy to all the prince's plans, and Buttercup was well aware of this. I don't know your fellow well, but he impressed me greatly. Any man who can find his way through the fire swamp can find his way to Florin Castle before your wedding day. Buttercup nodded. He seemed so strong, so remarkably powerful, the Count went on, his voice warm and lulling. I wonder if he possessed true sensitivity, as some men of great might, do not. For example, I wonder if he is capable of tears. Wesley would never cry, Buttercup answered, opening her chamber door. Except for the death of a loved one. And with that, she closed the Count away, and alone went to her bed and knelt. Wesley, she thought then, do please come. I have begged you in my thoughts now these many weeks, and still no word. Back when we were on the farm, I thought I loved you, but that was not love. When I saw your face behind the mask on the ravine floor, I thought I loved you. But that was, again, nothing more than deep infatuation. Beloved, I think I love you now, and I pray you only give me the chance to spend my life in constant proving. I could spend my life in the fire swamp and sing from morn till night if you were by me. I could spend eternity sinking down through snow sand if my hand held your hand. My preference would be to last eternity, with you beside me on a cloud. But hell would also be a lock if Wesley was with me. She went on that way, silent hour after silent hour. She had done nothing else for 38 evenings now, and each time her ardor deepened. Her thoughts became more pure. Wesley, Wesley, flying across the 7 seas to claim her heart. For his part, and quite without knowing, Wesley was spending his evenings in much the same fashion. After the torture was done, when the albino had finished tending his slashes or burns or breaks, when he was alone in the giant cage, he sent his brain to Buttercup, and there it dwelled. He understood her so well. In his mind, he realized that moment, the moment he left her on the farm, when she swore love. Certainly she meant it. But she was barely 18. What did she know of the depth of her heart? Then again, when he had removed his black mask and she tumbled to him, surprise had been operating, stunned, astonishment, such as emotion. But just as he knew that the sun was obliged to rise each morning in the east, no matter how much a western arrival might have pleased it. So he knew that Buttercup was obliged to spend her love on him. Gold was inviting, and so was royalty. But they could not match the fever in his heart, and sooner or later she would have to catch it. She had no less choice than the sun. So when the Count appeared with the machine, Wesley was not particularly perturbed. As a matter of fact, he had no idea what the Count was bringing with him into that giant cage. As a matter of absolute fact, the Count was bringing nothing. It was the albino who was doing the actual work, making trip after trip with thing after thing. That was what it really looked like to Wesley. Things. Little soft-rimmed cups of various sizes in a wheel. Most likely some other object that could turn out to be either a lever or a stick. It was hard to tell. A good evening to you, the Count began. He had never, to Wesley's memory, shown such excitement. Wesley made a very weak nod in return. Actually, he felt about as well as ever, but it didn't do to let that kind of news get around. Feeling a bit under the weather, the Count asked. Wesley made another feeble nod. The albino scurried in and out, bringing more things, wired-like extensions, stringy, and endless. That will be all, the Count said finally. Nod. Gone. This is the machine, the Count said when they were all alone. I've put 11 years constructing it. As you can tell, I'm rather excited and proud. Wesley managed an affirmative blink. I'll be putting it together for a while. And with that, he got busy. Wesley watched the construction with a good deal of interest and, logically enough, curiosity. You heard that scream a bit early on this evening. Another affirmative blink. That was a wild dog. This machine caused the sound. It was a very complex job the Count was doing, but the 6 fingers on his right hand never for a moment seemed to doubt as just what to do. I'm very interested in pain, the Count said, as I'm sure you've gathered these past months. In an intellectual way, actually. I've written, of course, for the more learned journals on the subject. Articles mostly. At the present, I'm engaged in writing a book. My book. The book, I hope. The definitive work on pain. At least what we know. At least as we know it now. Wesley found the whole thing fascinating. He made a little groan. I think pain is the most underrated emotion available to us, the Count said. The serpent, to my interpretation, was pain. Pain has been with us always, and it always irritates me when people say it as important as life and death. Because the proper phrase in my mind should be as important as pain and death. The Count fell silent for a time then, as he began a complete series of complex adjustments. One of my theories, he said somewhat later, is that pain involves anticipation. Nothing original, I admit, but I'm going to demonstrate to you what I mean. I will not underline, not use the machine on you this evening. I could. It's ready. I've tested. But instead, I will simply erect it and leave it beside you for you to stare at for the next 24 hours, wondering just what it is and how it works, and can it really be as dreadful as all that? He tightened some things here, loosened some more over there, tugged and patted and shaped. The machine looked so silly to Wesley was tempted to giggle. Instead, he groaned again. I'll leave you to your imagination, then, the Count said, and he looked at Wesley. But I want you to know one thing before tomorrow night happens to you, and I mean it. You are the strongest, the most brilliant and bravest, the most altogether worthy creature it has ever been my privilege to meet. And I almost feel sad for that. For the purpose of my book and future pain scholars, I must destroy you. Thank you. Wesley breathed softly. The Count went to the cage door and said over his shoulder, "And you can stop all your performing about how weak and beaten you are. You haven't fooled me for a month. You're practically as strong now as the day you entered the fire swamp. I know your secret, if that's any consolation to you." Secret? Hushed, strained. "You've been taking your brain away," the Count cried. "You haven't felt the least discomfort in all these 3 months. You raise your eyes and drop your eyelids, and you're off. Probably with, I don't know, her most likely. Good night now. Try and sleep. I doubt you'll be able to. Anticipation. Remember?" With a wave, he mounted the underground stairs. Wesley could feel the sudden pressure of his heart. Soon the albino came, knelt by Wesley's ear, whispered, "I've been watching you all these days. You deserve better than what's coming. I'm needed. No one else feeds the beasts as I do. I'm safe. They won't hurt me. I'll kill you if you like. That would foil them. I've got some poison. I beg you. I've seen the machine. I was there when the wild dog screamed. Please let me kill you. They'll thank me, I swear." "I must live," whispered. But, interruption. "They will not reach me. I am all right. I am fine. I am alive, and I will stay that way." He said the words loud, and he said them with passion. But for the first time in a long time, there was terror. "Well, could you sleep?" the Count asked the next night upon his arrival in the cage. "Quite honestly, no," Wesley replied in his normal voice. "I'm glad you're being honest with me. I'll be honest with you. No more charades between us," the Count said, putting down a number of notebooks and quill pens and ink bottles. "I must carefully track your reactions," he exclaimed. "In the name of science." The Count nodded. "If my experiments are valid, my name will last beyond my body. My immortality, it's mortality I'm after, to be quite honest." He adjusted a few knobs in the machine. "I suppose you're naturally curious as to how this works." "I have spent the night pondering, and I now know no more than when I started. It appears to be a great conglomeration of soft-rimmed cups of infinitely varied sizes, together with a wheel and a dial and a lever, and what it does is beyond me. Also glue," added the Count, pointing to a stiff tub of thick stuff, "to keep the cups attached." And with that, he set to work taking cup after cup, touching the soft rims with glue, and setting them against Wesley's skin. "Eventually, I'll have to put one on your tongue, too," the Count said, "but I'll save that one for last in case you have any questions." "This certainly isn't the easiest thing to set up, is it?" "I'll be able to fix that in later models," the Count said. "At least, those are my present plans." And he kept right on putting cup after cup on Wesley's skin until every inch of exposed surface was covered. "So much for the outside," the Count said then. "This next is a bit more delicate. Try not to move." "I'm chained hand, head, and foot," Wesley said. "How much movement do you think I'm capable of?" "Are you really as brave as you sound, or are you a little frightened? The truth, please. This is for prosperity, remember." "I'm a little frightened," Wesley replied. The Count jotted that down along with the time. Then he got down to the fine work, and soon there were tiny, soft-rimmed cups on the inside of Wesley's nostrils, against his eardrums, under his eyelids, above and below his tongue, And the Count arose. Wesley was covered inside and out with things. Now, all that I do, the Count said very loudly, hoping Wesley could hear, is get the wheel going to its fastest spin. So all I have to do is watch the power. So all I have to do, so that all I have more than enough power to operate. And the dial can be set from 1 to 20. This being the first time, I will set the lowest setting, which is 1. And then all I do is push the lever forward, and we shall, if I've gummed it up, be in full operation. But Wesley, as the lever moved, took his brain away. And when the machine began, Wesley was stroking her autumn-colored hair. And touching the skin of her wintry cream. And then his world exploded because the cups were everywhere. And before, they had just punished his body, but left his brain. Only not the machine. The machine reached everywhere. His eyes were not his to control, and his ears could not hear her gentle, loving whisper, and his brain slid far from love into the deep vault of despair, hit again, fell hard, down through the house of agony, into the county of pain, inside and out. Wesley's world was ripping apart, and he could do nothing but crack along with it. The Count turned off the machine then, and he picked up his notebook and said, "As you no doubt know, the concept of the suction pump is centuries old. Well, basically, that's all this is. Except instead of water, I'm sucking life. I've just sucked away 1 year of your life. Later, I'll set the dial higher. Certainly to 2 or 3, perhaps even to 5. Theoretically, 5 should be 5 times more than severe than what you've just endured. So please, be specific with your answers. Tell me, how honestly do you feel? Tell me honestly, how do you feel? In humiliation, and suffering, and frustration, and anger, and anguish so great it was dizzying. Wesley cried like a baby. Interesting," said the Count, and carefully noted it down. It took Yellen a week to get his forces together in sufficient number, together with an adequate brute squad. And so 5 days before the wedding, he stood at the head of his company, awaiting the speech of the prince. This was in the castle courtyard, and when the prince appeared, the Count was, as usual, with him. Although not as usual, the Count seemed preoccupied, which, of course, he was, though Yellen had no way of knowing that. The Count had sucked 10 years from Wesley this past week. And with the life of 65 being the average for a Florinese male, the victim was had approximately 30 years remaining, assuming that he was about 25 when they started the experiment. But how best to go about dividing that? The Count was simply in a quandary. So many possibilities, but which to prove scientifically most interesting. The Count sighed. Life was never easy. "You are here," the prince began, "because there may be a plot against my beloved. I charge each and every one of you with being her personal protector. I want the thieves' quarter emptied, and all the inhabitants jailed 24 hours before my wedding. Only then will I rest easy. Gentlemen, I beg you, think of this mission as being an affair of the heart, and I know you will not fail." With that, he pivoted, and followed by the Count, hurried from the courtyard, leaving Yellen in command. The conquest of the thieves' quarters began immediately. Yellen worked long and hard each day, but the thieves' quarter was a mile square. So, there was much to do. Most of the criminals had been through unjust and illegal roundups before, so they offered little resistance. They knew the jails were not sold enough for all of them, so it meant a few days incarceration. What did it matter? There was, however, a second group of criminals, those who realized that capture meant, for various fast performances, death, and these, without exception, resisted. In general, Yellen, through adroit handling of the brute squad, was able to bring these bad fellows eventually under control. Still, 36 hours before the sunset wedding, there were half a dozen holdouts left in the thieves' quarter. Yelling arose at dawn, tired and confused. Not one of these captured criminals seemed to come from Gilder. He gathered the best of the brute squad and let them into the thieves' quarter for what simply had to be the final foray. Yellen went immediately to Falkbridge's alehouse, first sending all save 2 brutes off on various tasks, keeping a noisy one and a quiet one for his own needs. He knocked on Falkbridge's door and waited. Falkbridge was, by far, the most powerful man in the thieves' quarter. He seemed almost to own half of it, and there wasn't a crime of any dimension he wasn't behind. He always avoided arrest, and everyone except Yellen thought Falkbridge must be bribing somebody. Yellen knew he was bribing someone, since every month, rain or shine, Falkbridge came to Yellen's house and gave him a satchel full of money. Who? Falkbridge called from inside the alehouse. The chief of all law enforcement in Florence City, accompanied by brutes, Yellen replied. Completeness was one of his virtues. Oh. Falkbridge opened the door. For a power, he was very unimposing, short and chubby. Come in. Yellen entered, leaving the 2 brutes in the doorway. Get ready and be quick, Yellen said. Hey, Yellen, it's me, Falkbridge said softly. I know, Yellen said softly right back, but please, do me a favor, get ready. Pretend I did. I'll stay in the alehouse, I promise. I got enough food, no one will ever know. The prince is without mercy, Yellen said. If I let you stay and I'm found out, that's it for me. I've been paying you 20 years to stay out of jail. You're a rich man just so I don't have to go to jail. Where's the logic of me paying you and no advantages? I'll make it up to you. I'll get you the best cell in Florence City. Don't you trust me? How can I trust a man I paid 20 years to stay out of jail all of a sudden, the minute a little extra pressure's on, he says, go to jail. I'm not going. You! Yellen signaled to the noisy one. The brute started running forward. Put this man in the wagon immediately, Yellen said. Falkbridge was starting to explain when the noisy one clubbed him across the neck. Not so hard, Yellen cried. The noisy one picked up Falkbridge, tried dusting his clothes. Is he alive? Yellen asked. See, I don't know why you wanted him breathing in the wagon. I thought you only wanted him in the wagon breathing, or not so. Enough! Yellen interrupted, and upset, he hurried out of the alehouse, while the noisy one brought Falkbridge. Is everyone together? Yellen asked as various brutes were visible leaving the thieves' quarter pulling various wagons. I think there's still a fence with the brandy, the noisy one began. See, they tried getting him yesterday, but I can't be bothered with a drunk. I'm an important man. Get him out of here and do it now, both of you. Take the wagon with you and be quick. This quarter must be locked and deserted by sundown, or the prince will be mad, and I don't like it when the prince is mad at me. We're going, the noisy one replied. And he hurried off, letting the quiet one bring up the wagon with Falkbridge inside. They tried getting this fencer yesterday, some of the standard enforcers, but it seems he has certain sword skills that make them worry. But I think I have a trick that will work. The quiet one hurried along behind, dragging the wagon. They rounded a corner, and around another corner, just up ahead, a kind of drunken mumbling was starting to get louder. I'm getting very bored, Vizzini, came from out of sight. 3 months is a long time to wait, especially for a passionate Spaniard. Much louder now. And I am very passionate, Vizzini. You are nothing but a tardy Sicilian. So if you're not here in 90 more days, I'm done with you. You hear? Done. Much softer now. I didn't mean that, Vizzini. I just love my filthy stoop. Take your time. The noisy brute slowed. That kind of talk goes on all day. Ignore it and keep the wagon out of sight. The quiet one pushed the wagon almost to a corner and stopped it. Stay with the wagon, the noisy one added, and then whispered, Here comes my trick. With that, he walked alone around the corner and stared ahead at the skinny fellow, sitting clutching the brandy bottle on the stoop. Ho there, friend, the noisy one said. I'm not moving. Keep your there, said the brandy drinker. Hear me through, please. I have been sent by Prince Humperdinck himself, who is in need of entertainment. Tomorrow is our country's 500th anniversary, and the dozen greatest tumblers, inventors, and entertainers are at this very moment competing. The finest pair will compete tomorrow for the new bride and groom. Now, as to why I'm here, yesterday some of my friends tried rousing you, and they said later that you resisted with some splendid sword work. So if you'd like, I, at great personal sacrifice, will rush you to the fencing contest, where, if you are as good as I am told, you might have yet the honor of entertaining the royal couple tomorrow. Do you think you could win such a competition? Breezing. Then hurry while there's still time to enter. The Spaniard managed to stand. He unsheathed his sword and flashed it a few times across the morning. The noisy one took a few quick steps behind and said, No time to waste. Come along now. Then the drunk started yelling, I'm waiting for Vizzini, meanie. I'm not mean. I just following the rule. Cruel. Not cruel. Not mean. Don't you understand? And then his voice trailed off for a moment, and he squinted. Then quietly he said, Fezzik. From behind the noisy one, the quiet one said, Who's Fezzik? Inigo took a step from his stoop, trying desperately to make his eyes focus with the brandy. Fezzik? Is that the joke you made? The quiet one said, Played. Fezzik gave a cry and started staggering forward. Fezzik, it's you! True. And he reached out, grabbed Inigo just before he stumbled, and brought him back to an upright position. Hold him like that. Hold him just like that, the noisy brute said. And he moved in quietly, right arm raised, just as he had done to Falkbridge. Splat! Fezzik dumped the noisy brute into the wagon beside Falkbridge, covered them both with a soiled blanket, then hurried back to Inigo, whom he had left leaning propped against the building. It's so good to see you, Fezzik said. Oh, it is, but Inigo's voice was winding steadily down now. I'm too weak for surprises. Were the last sounds he got out before he fainted from fatigue, and brandy, and no food, and bad sleep, and lots of other things, none of them nutritious. Fezzik hoisted him up with one arm, took the wagon in the other, and hurried back to Falkbridge's house. He carried Inigo inside, placed him upstairs on Falkbridge's featherbed, and then hurried to the entrance of the thieves' quarter, dragging the wagon behind him. He made very sure that the dirty blanket covered both the victims, and outside the entrance of the brute squad held the boot count of those they had removed. The total came out right, and by 11 in the morning, the great walled thieves' quarter had been officially emptied and padlocked. Released from active duty, Fezzik followed the wall around to a quiet place and waited. He was alone. Walls were never a problem for him, not so long as his arms worked, and he quickly scaled this one and hurried back through the quiet streets to Falkbridge's house. He made some tea, carried it upstairs, force-fed Inigo. Within a few moments, Inigo was blinking under his own power. "It's just so good to see you," Fezzik said then. "Oh, it is, Inigo agreed. "And I'm sorry for fainting, but I've done nothing for 90 days but wait for Vizzini and drink brandy. And a surprise like seeing you, well, that was just too much for me on an empty stomach. But I'm fine now." "Good," Fezzik said. "Vizzini is dead." "He is, eh? Dead, you say? And then he fainted again. Fezzik began berating himself. "Oh, you stupid. If there's a right way and a wrong way, trust you to find the dumb way. Fool, fool. Back to the beginning was the rule." Fezzik really felt idiotic then, because after months of forgetting, now that he didn't need to remember anymore, he remembered. He hurried downstairs and made some tea and brought some crackers and honey and fed Inigo again. When Inigo blinked, Fezzik said, "Rest." "Thank you, my friend. No more fainting." And he closed his eyes and slept for an hour. Fezzik busied himself in Falkbridge's kitchen. He really didn't know how to prepare a proper meal, but he could heat, and he could cool, and he could sniff the good meat from the rotted. So it wasn't just too great a task to finally end up with something that once looked like a roast beef and another thing that could have been a potato. The unexpected smell of hot food brought Inigo around, and he lay in bed eating every bite Fezzik fed him. "I never realized I was in such a terrible condition," Inigo said, chewing away. "Shh, you'll be fine now," Fezzik said, cutting another piece of meat, putting it into Inigo's mouth. Inigo chewed it carefully. "First your appearance so suddenly, and then, on top of that business, the business of Vizzini. It was too much for me." "It would have been too much for anybody. Just rest." Fezzik began to cut another piece of meat. I feel such a baby, so helpless." Inigo said, taking the next bite, chewing away. "You'll be strong as ever by sundown," Fezzik promised, getting the next piece of meat ready. The six-fingered man is named Count Rugen, and he's here right now in Florence City." "Interesting." Inigo managed this time before he fainted again. Fezzik stood over the still figure. "Well, it is good to see you," he said. "It's been such a long time, and I've got so much news." Inigo only lay there. Fezzik hurried to Falkport's tub, plugged it up, and worked on. And after a lot of work, he got it filling with steaming water. And then he dunked Inigo in, holding him down with one hand, holding Inigo's mouth shut with the other. And when the brandy began to sweat from the Spaniard's body, Fezzik emptied the tub and filled it again, with icy water this time. And back he plunged Inigo. And when the water began to warm a bit, and he filled the tub with steaming stuff, and back went Inigo. And now the brandy was really oozing from his pores. And that is how it went, hour after hour. Hot, to icy cold, to steaming hot, then some tea, and then some toast, and then some steaming hot again, and more icy cold, and then a nap, and then there was more toast and less tea. But the longest steamer yet. And this time, there wasn't much brandy left inside. And one final icy cold, and then there was a 2-hour sleep until by mid-afternoon. They sat downstairs in Falkbridge's kitchen. And now, at last, for the first time in 90 days, Inigo's eyes were almost bright. His hands did shake, but not all that noticeably. And perhaps the Inigo of before the brandy would have bested this fellow now in 60 minutes of solid fencing. But not too many masters in the world would have survived for 5. Tell me now, briefly now, while I've been here with the brandy, where have you been? Well, I spent some time in a fishing village, and then I wandered a bit, and then a few weeks ago I found myself in Gilder, and the talk there was of the coming wedding, and perhaps a coming war, and I remember Buttercup when I carried her up the cliffs of insanity. She was so pretty and soft, and I had never been so near perfume before that I thought it might be nice to see her wedding celebrations. So I came here, but my money was gone, And then they were forming a brute squad and needed giants, and I went to apply, and they beat me with clubs to see if I was strong enough, and when the clubs broke, they decided I was. I've been a brute first class all this past week. It's very good pay. Inigo nodded. All right, then. Again, and this time, please be brief. From the beginning, the man in black, did he get by you? Yes, fairly, too. Strength against strength. I was too slow and out of practice. And then, it was he that killed Vizzini. That is my belief. Did he use his sword or his strength? That's a trick to remember. There weren't any sword wounds, and Vizzini didn't seem broken. There were just 2 goblets and Vizzini dead. Poison is my guess. Why would Vizzini take poison? Fezzik hadn't the least idea. But he was definitely dead. Fezzik was positive. Inigo began to pace the kitchen, his movements quick and sharp, the way his movements were. All right, Vizzini is dead, enough of that. Tell me briefly where the 6-fingered Rugen is so I may kill him. That may not be so easy, Inigo, because the Count is with the Prince, and the Prince is in his castle, and he is pledged not to leave till after his wedding, for the fear another sneak attack from Gilder. And all the entrances by the main one are sealed for safety. And the main doors are guarded by 20 men. Inigo said, pacing much faster now. If you fought 5 and I fenced 5, that would mean 10, which would be bad because that would also mean 10 left and they would kill us. But, he said, and he put his pace even more, if you should take 6 and I should take 8, that would mean 14 beaten, which would not be as bad, but still not enough, since 6 remaining would kill us. Then he whirled on Fezzik. How many can you handle at most? Well, some of them are from the Brute Squad, so I don't think more than 8. Leaving me 12, which is not impossible, but not the best way to spend our first evening after 3 months on brandy. Your first evening after 3 months on brandy. And suddenly Inigo's body sagged, and in his eyes, bright a moment ago, now there was moisture. What has happened, my friend? What has happened? Fezzik cried. Oh, my friend, I need Vizzini. I am not a planner. I follow. Tell me what to do. No man alive does it better. But my mind is like fine wine. It travels badly. I go from thought to thought, but not with logic. And I forget things. And help me, Fezzik. What am I to do? Fezzik wanted to cry now, too. I am the stupidest fellow that was ever born. You know that. I couldn't remember to come back here, even after you made up that special lovely rhyme for me. I need Vizzini. But Vizzini is dead. And then Inigo was up again, blazing about the kitchen for the first time. His fingers were snapping with excitement. I don't need Vizzini. I need his master. I need the man in black. Look, he bested me with my steel, my greatness. He bested you with strength, yours. He must have outplanned and outthought Vizzini, and he will tell me how to break through the castle and kill the 6-fingered beast. If you have the least notion where the man in black is at this moment, relate, quickly, the answer. He sails the 7 seas with the dread pirate Roberts. Why would he do a thing like that? Because he is a sailor for the dread pirate Roberts. A sailor? A common sailor. A common, ordinary seaman beats the great Inigo Montoya with a sword? Inconceivable! He must be the dread pirate Roberts. Otherwise it makes no sense. In any event, he is sailing far away. Count Rugen says so, and the prince himself gave the order. The prince wants no pirates around. What will fall the trouble he is having with Gilder? Remember, they kidnapped the princess once. They might try. Fezzik! We kidnapped the princess once. You never were strong on memory. But even when you recall that we put the Gilder uniform pieces on the princess's saddle, even you should recall that we put the Gilder's uniforms on the princess's saddle. Vizzini did it because he was under orders. Someone wanted Gilder to look guilty. And who but a noble would want that, and what noble more than the war-loving prince himself? I never knew who hired Vizzini. I guess Humperdinck. And as for the Count's word on the man in black's whereabouts, since the Count is the same man who slaughtered my father, we can rest assured that he is certainly a terrific fellow. He started for the door. Come! We have much to do. Fezzik followed him to the darkening streets of the thieves' quarter. You'll explain things to me as we go along? Fezzik asked. I'll explain them to you now. His blade-like body knifed on through the quiet streets, Fezzik hurrying alongside. A. I need to reach Count Rugen to at last avenge my father. B. I cannot plan on how to reach Count Rugen. C. Vizzini could have planned it for me, but C'. Vizzini is unavailable, however. D. The man in black outplanned Vizzini, so therefore, E. The man in black could get me to Count Rugen. But I told you, Prince Humperdinck, after he captured him, gave orders for all to hear the man in black was to return safely to his ship. Everyone in Florin knows this to be so. A. Prince Humperdinck has some plans to kill his fiancée and hired us to carry that out. And B. The man in black ruined Prince Humperdinck's plans. However, eventually, C. Prince Humperdinck managed to capture the man in black, and as everybody in all of Florin also knows, Prince Humperdinck has a terrible temper. So therefore, D. If a man has a terrible temper, what would be more fun than losing it against the very fellow who spoiled your plans to kill your fiancée? They had reached the thieves' quarters wall now, and Inigo jumped on Fezzik's shoulders, and Fezzik started to climb. Conclusion 1. Inigo continued, not missing a beat. Since the prince is in Florin City, taking out his temper on the man in black must also be in Florin City. Conclusion 2. The man in black must not be too happy with his present situation. Conclusion 3. I'm in Florin City and need a planner to avenge my father, and while he is in Florin City, I need a rescuer to salvage his future. And when people have equal needs of each other. Conclusion 4 and final. Deals are made. Fezzik reached the top of the wall and started carefully climbing down the other side. I understand everything, he said. You understand nothing. But it doesn't really matter, since what you mean is you're glad to see me, just as I'm glad to see you, because no more loneliness. That's what I mean, said Fezzik. And we shall end chapter 6 there. We're almost done with chapter 6, guys. And hopefully we will be able to save Wesley, and he'll be able to save Princess Buttercup from the maddening madness that is Humperdinck. But aren't you glad that Fezzik and Inigo had found each other again? They are no longer alone, and they are no longer wandering by themselves. We will continue with The Princess Bride chapter 6 soon. I hope you're all doing well. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.